May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. I'm going to try and keep it together. Do I have any recovering fundamentalists here? I see you. I am you. For any who don't know me, my name is Angela. My pronouns are she and her. And I was raised fundamentalist in West Texas in a small town where the black and brown people literally lived on the other side of the tracks. And there definitely were no gay people. It's about 3 counties over from the epicenter of the recent measles outbreak, just to put it in some context for you. Just being a nerd was enough to make me feel like a fish out of water there, and I got out as soon as I could. But not before verses like our readings today were being used metaphorically to beat into me how a good Christian girl was supposed to behave. This Galatians text has been a challenge as I unlearned the teachings that I grew up with and replaced them with a more grace-filled Lutheran understanding. One of the downsides of a belief in the Bible as literally true, as most fundamentalists believe, is that you wind up missing the point whenever Paul talks about the flesh. As Birgit Kahl, professor of New Testament at Union Theological Seminary, says in a commentary on this text, the term flesh is, next to law, one of the most misunderstood words in Paul's theological vocabulary that needs to be extracted from deeply ingrained patterns of anti-body, anti-woman, and anti-earth interpretations. She goes on to define flesh as Paul uses the word as flesh is the ego-driven impulse, the passions and desires of relentless self-promotion and self-interest at the expense of or in disregard of the others. This means that the real battle to direct the way we live is between self-interest and care for others, not physical or sexual desire versus esoteric spiritual purposes. I think on a cultural level, we understand this to some degree. Even the most self-centered superhero ever drawn, Tony Stark, or Iron Man for the non-nerds among us, ultimately sacrifices himself to repair the universe. Spoiler alert. But when it comes to real life, we still elevate to power those who spend their lives in pursuit of greed and self-interest, rather than those who spend their lives making life better for other people. Because we have been freed to live with integrity through the cross of Christ, we have a responsibility to make life with integrity possible for others through our own service and actions. The outcome of our actions, both personal and corporate, should be an increase in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control in every life around the world. No pressure. This brings me to a question I must ask if I am to continue with integrity. Why am I, a cisgender heterosexual woman, speaking on Pride Sunday instead of one of my LGBTQIA plus siblings? I presume it's because everybody else that was on the short list said no. I think it could also be because I am an ally with a somewhat unique perspective. For those who don't know, some years ago, I chose to have children as a single woman with a gay man, and then to co-parent those children with him and his husband. It was unquestionably the best decision I have ever made. To say that LGBTQIA plus equality is important to me is an understatement, but it's never going to be the existential necessity, the life and death necessity that it is for millions of LGBTQIA plus people around the world. Given our current reality, it is more important than ever that we allies regularly examine our allyship and improve upon it. Our LGBTQIA siblings may feel too vulnerable to speak up or even to live as authentically as they might have in the past. Sometimes allyship may mean giving them a break from the burden of the spotlight without speaking for them or centering our own allyship instead of their need to live without discrimination. It can be uncomfortable to critically examine your own allyship. It takes deep listening, reflection, and discernment. Some of the smallest things can matter a lot, though. Just showing up to advocate for equal rights. Remembering pronouns and chosen names. Asking rather than assuming what someone's pronouns are. Not assuming the gender of someone's partner, even if you know the gender of their previous partner. Hello, bisexual erasure, I see you. Using the singular they. I know, I had to get used to it too. And I still slip up sometimes. But the more you practice it, the easier it is. Loving unconditionally in both word and deed is a muscle that must be exercised with challenge in order to grow. And unconditional love is sorely needed. According to the Trevor Project's 2020 National Survey on LGBTQ youth mental health, 54% of transgender or non-binary young people seriously considered suicide in the last year, and 29% have made an attempt to end their lives. And I would bet money that those numbers have increased since 2020. But research shows that acceptance by just one important adult in their lives can reduce their risk of a suicide attempt by up to 1/3 among transgender and non-binary youth. That's one person. One person accepting them makes that much difference. So learning to accept people is not just a form of spirit-led unconditional love. It can literally be life-saving for transgender and non-binary youth. Although we have seen a concerted political effort in opposition to LGBTQIA plus equality and acceptance in the last 6 months, and certain kinds of myths continue to circulate about this group of people, history shows that both secular societies and Christianity have had an ebb and flow over time in the way sexuality and gender are viewed. The church was largely silent and, in many cases, quietly accepting of same-sex relationships until the late 12th century, when a period of increased persecution began and continued through the Inquisitions. The word homosexual didn't exist until the mid-1800s, when same-sex attraction began to be pathologized by physicians. However, prior to World War II, there was a thriving center of transgender medicine in Germany, and Germans could get an official certificate to live publicly as a different gender. For a few years, legal name changes were even possible for transgender individuals in Germany. Of course, that all ended with the rise of Hitler. In the US, the first state to decriminalize same-sex activity did so in 1962. Although the 1980s represented a political shift to the right in the US, cultural attitudes towards LGBTQIA plus rights continue to evolve towards support for equality during that decade. And just earlier this week, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Supreme Court case that legalized marriage equality nationally. Public support for marriage equality and LGBTQIA rights continues to be widespread in the United States, expanding in the years since Obergefell was decided. In spite of social stigma and no formal way to protect their right to live as they wished, historical evidence exists of small numbers of individuals secretly living full, productive lives as a different gender, and of same-sex couples living together for decades within their own bubbles of acceptance, going back hundreds of years in the U.S., and much further than that in other societies. Over the last few decades, scientific evidence has been accumulating that a wide variety of same-sex activity happens routinely among 1,500 animal species and counting. And this is not aberrant behavior. This is not unusual behavior. It is daily part of their biology for these species. There's a delightfully funny and informative book on this subject called Queer Ducks and Other Animals by Elliot Schrieffer. I do highly recommend it. Some of this scientific evidence was documented as long ago as the mid-1800s, but social prejudices led to its suppression. Nobody's immune to bias, not even scientists. This knowledge really takes the fangs out of all the arguments I have ever heard for not accepting LGBTQIA+ people as just another flavor of human. In spite of this, I know that there will be some people who just can't get to a place of acceptance, at least not right now. But the gospel reading today helps me get to a place where I can still accept and love those folks unconditionally. The gospel today shows that it is okay to say no to God. This is most definitely something that I would not have learned as a fundamentalist. Jesus sends disciples ahead to a Samaritan village asking for hospitality. Most of you will be aware that hospitality was a big deal at that time, and that there was a centuries-long, brutal and bloody history of enmity between Jews and Samaritans. The Samaritan village says no to Jesus because Jesus had set his face toward Jerusalem. To the Samaritans, Jesus had chosen a side. And they made what probably seemed like a prudent choice for their own interests at the time. The disciples immediately jumped to asking for violent vengeance, perhaps because of their own prejudices as they were Jewish. But Jesus says, absolutely not, and just moves on to another village. We don't know if there was a cost to that Samaritan village for saying no. We do know that Jesus went on to die and be raised for everyone's salvation. And there was no fine print attached saying, except for that one Samaritan village that shunned me. In a commentary on this passage, Reverend Chelsea Brooke Yarbrough states it beautifully. Allowing others to have agency is an act of love. When my Christian siblings, actually when anybody, choose to hang on to their anti-LGBTQIA biases, I am 100% not okay with that. But I can follow Jesus here and allow them to have the agency to make that choice. I can lift them up to God in prayer, or as they say in Texas, bless your heart. And I can work to make sure that their beliefs are not allowed to limit the rights of my LGBTQIA+ siblings in our shared civic life. Finally, today's gospel also shows us how bad we are at understanding the urgency of God's mission. Several potential disciples want to follow him, but Jesus' expectations are high, and each has something holding him back. Jesus at this time is literally on his way to his own death, so I can understand why he has little patience for the mundane concerns of these potential disciples, even if those concerns are valid and important. The thing about a plow, though, as Jesus mentions in the last verse, is that once the oxen are moving, if you turn your head, you're going to plow crooked lines, crooked rows. Here, Jesus is in motion, and he will not be turned aside by looking back. God has set us in motion. Our mission is to do God's work in the world, to care for the vulnerable, to make the church safe for all God's children, including our LGBTQIA+ siblings, to right the damage that we've done to the earth, to value the inherent worth of all God's creation, both human and not. The need is urgent, and our hands are on the plow. We must not be turned aside. Amen.